Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm so excited to take you through this really interesting topic about relationships. So, we're going to talk about intentionality in relationships, what that actually means. I want to give you some really practical tools to design your relationship. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about intentionality. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about one of the things that I think is a really important consideration with regards to intentionality in relationships, which is, of course, relationship structure. And that includes potentially monogamy and non monogamy. But there's lots of things that exist within that umbrella of relationship structure. That is an area I get a lot of questions about. I am seeing this show up as an area of interest for more and more of my clients. And I have my own lived experience of designing my own relationship with different structures and different boundaries around monogamy. So I'm very excited to take you through this. So, first thing to note though is I will be giving you some reflection questions and prompts, things to think about, things to perhaps journal on later. So, if possible, make sure you've got something with you where you can write those down. I am a huge fan of journaling. I actually personally am not particularly a fan of writing, and I wouldn't keep a diary. It just doesn't quite do it for me. But journaling on specific prompts or specific reflection questions, I am a huge fan of. The reason it is so helpful is that fundamentally we cannot write as fast as we think. So when we are writing, we are forced to slow down, really catch the thoughts that we're having, and start to kind of turn them over, start to really examine them, really start to get underneath. Wait, where is that thought really coming from? What does that actually mean? And this feeling that's been popping up about something, what's actually kind of underneath that? What's the story I'm telling myself about that? So that is the power of journaling. So let's get into this. Uh, I wanted to start by kind of I guess just out the gate saying that I am firmly of the belief that there is no one right way to do relationships. This is my most firm ground about relationship structures and relationship design and intentionality, is that there isn't one right way. It's different for everyone and every relationship. And the reason I think that is so important is because, and I'm going to touch on this in a moment in more detail, there's so much within which we've internalized about what is the right way to do a relationship. Obviously, there's a lot of messaging we get about what's socially acceptable. And I just really want to start by laying that foundation that there isn't one right way to do relationships. Sometimes I get described as being like pro non-monogamy. I'm not pro non-monogamy any more than I am pro monogamy. I don't think one is better than the other, and I definitely don't think one is more evolved than the other. I think that's another myth I hear about non-monogamy, is that it's kind of evolved past monogamy, and I don't think that's the case at all. So I don't think monogamy or non-monogamy is superior, and I've been in wonderful relationships that have elements of both. So I just think that's really important to say out the gate. So I mentioned there some internalized ideas about relationships, and I wanted to start there. Most of us have grown up with the idea that monogamy is how you do relationships. That is the default. And mononormativity is the assumption that monogamy is the natural way, the normal, natural, like superior, perhaps almost moral way, the most right way. And a lot of us have internalized mononormativity, right? So even people who might be a little bit curious about exploring non monogamy might notice some thoughts and feelings come up within themselves that are actually reflective of their own internalized mononormativity. So, for example, when I mention non monogamy to people and people go, oh, I would just get jealous, right? And that's because we've internalized some ideas about certain things should only be reserved for one person. And when you start to really unpack that, you might start to notice some questions come up. So, for example, think about some of the things that we have reserved for monogamous relationships, right? So I think the most obvious example I can think of is sex, right? So if sex is an activity that has been typically seen as reserved for one partner only, and then you start to think about other activities you do in your life, like sharing a meal or going to the movies together or going for a hike. These are all activities that we've never decided socially that they are only for one person. We do those things with many different people. And if I have a friend who really likes hiking, I might go hiking with them. And then there might be a friend or even a partner who doesn't like hiking and I never go with them. And that's all okay. We've all decided that's all okay. But we've decided that there are certain activities like sex that are only reserved for one person. And these are the types of things that I really invite you to start to get underneath. You might have even noticed, as I said that to you, some of your own resistance. You might have even noticed, like, yes, Laura, but sex is different. Like, that's different. That is should just be with one partner. And I really invite you to think about why you think that. You might still come to the decision that for you, that is just for one person, and that is totally okay. But the purpose of this webinar today and the questions I'm going to pose to you are to get you to challenge and start to unpack, wait, why do I actually believe that? What is actually impacting that? It's really important to do that because some of this internalized mononormativity might shape our choices and lead us to make decisions about relationships that aren't actually the best fit for ourselves. So that is why this topic is so important today. You know, one of the concepts that I think is really important here, and I mentioned in one of my recent emails to you all, is this concept of the relationship escalator. So the relationship escalator is a term that was coined by Amy Guerin, and it refers to, as an extension of internalized mononormativity, it refers to this culturally scripted path escalator that relationships are traditionally supposed to take. So that looks like I meet someone, we decide it's exclusive, that we're not going to see other people. And then we progress to perhaps that exclusive dating, sex, cohabitation, marriage, buying a house, kids, forever, right? That is kind of the escalator. The problem with the escalator is not that that path is wrong or negative or bad for us, right? That path, that trajectory of relationship is perfectly fine and valid. The problem with the escalator is that people sometimes ride it without realizing they're on it. And what we're talking about here is at some point on that escalator, people can and do sometimes look around and look back down and go, how did I get here? Or I'm not sure I wanted this, and I'm not sure I want it now. And there can be a lot of feeling around that. There can be a lot of shame, and that is some of that internalized mononormativity stuff. There can be a lot of shame around, I actually want something different. I haven't done what I was supposed to do. I haven't met the needs of this other person. So we have a lot of pressure here, people putting pressure on themselves to want what they're told they're supposed to want. And it can also lead to a lot of unmet needs because most of us haven't got the language to ask for something different and to ask for something outside of the relationship escalator, particularly if we've ridden it for quite a while. And I see this a lot with my clients who have maybe been with someone for many years in a monogamous relationship, married, children, and look around and start to say things to me like, I don't even recognize myself anymore. My younger self didn't want this for me. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what I want, but it's not this. I don't even know who I am. Like these are the questions that start to come up around wants and needs, but also around identity. And when we've done something from a place of should, this is what I'm supposed to do, not only does that start to feel like an obligation, but we do also start to lose sight of what do I actually want. When people come to therapy, they're often coming because there is a gap between how their life is looking and feeling and how they want it to look and feel. And sometimes people come to me knowing how they want it to look and feel, but often they don't. And often that gap is a felt sense, but not with a sense of where do I want to go instead. There's just a sense of I'm waking up every day and this isn't feeling good. This isn't feeling right. So I'm going to pause there on this idea of internalized mononormativity and riding the relationship escalator. And I want to pause here because hopefully it's starting to get you thinking about how automatic sometimes some of the decisions can be in relationships. And they certainly have been for me. When I was much younger, I actually got married really young, really young. I got married when I was 22, and I'd been with that person since I was sort of 18, 19. And we got engaged 6 weeks after we started dating, which was uh, much to my parents' not delight. They were very concerned, as you can imagine, to have their 19-year-old engaged after 6 weeks, right? And we were together though for quite a while. We were together in total for about 8 years. We got married when I was 22. And after being married for a few years, we decided to try to have a baby. And he really wanted children. And I didn't know what I wanted. And I didn't really question it. And I know now that I don't want children. And I've never had children. I've actually never been pregnant. But I know now and have known for many years now that I'm in my early 40s, I've known for many, many years that I definitely do not want children for myself. But at this time, it was sort of in our mid to late 20s. My husband and I at the time were trying to have a baby. And even though I didn't have the words for I actually don't want this, there were some people very close to me that knew me and knew I didn't want this. And when I told my mum we were trying to have a baby, she said, "Why? Why?" And I was so floored by that question. I remember at the time being like, "What?" Like, well, because we're married and it's been a few years and that's what you do. But she knew me and she said, "What? Like, why are you doing this? What, really, why?" At the time, I remember being vaguely annoyed with her and thinking she doesn't get it. But she did. She did get it. Um, and fortunately, I'm going to say fortunately, we never conceived and we separated not long after that. But I was so struck by that. I've never forgotten her posing that question to me. Like, why are you doing this? Why do you want it? And even though it annoyed me at the time, I was, of course, very quickly grateful that she asked me that question. And I've reflected on that moment a lot since then. And that question of, like, why am I doing this? Why do I want this? Why do I think I want this? Really helps me. It really helps me consider my choices, but it also helps me consider what's informing my choices because all our choices exist within our very patriarchal, capitalist, mononormative society. And we are all trying to move through those systems, and those systems oppress many of us. So it is really important to understand that we are navigating life within systems that limit us. So, hopefully, this initial part of the webinar, thinking about intentionality, thinking about mononormativity and internalizing that and the relationship escalator has got you thinking a bit. It might have got you a little uncomfortable. I mentioned the word resistance before. So you might be listening to this already starting to notice some resistance, maybe starting to notice some thoughts like this isn't kind of for me. Like I already know that I've got what I want, or I definitely don't want non-monogamy, so I'm fine. That's okay. That is absolutely okay to feel that. I actually would really love you to journal about that resistance. Notice what it was that brought up the resistance for you, whether there was something in particular that I said that you felt in your body you wanted to reject or move away from. Lean into that. Lean into that in your reflection. And a couple of great questions I want to give you. I'm only going to give you two here. What steps of the escalator feel meaningful to me, and what feels more obligatory? And secondly, if I wasn't following these scripts, these internalized ideas about relationships, what might I want instead? And another great question, another great frame on that question is something like, if no one could see me, if there were no consequences, what might I want instead? I really wanted you to journal on these, not feeling any kind of pressure or action. Nothing is required from them. You might journal that you want to have lots of other relationships and sex in your life, and then you might never act on that, and that is totally fine. But I want you to have the space to explore. What might I want if no one knew, if no one was watching? So I want to move on here to talking about intentionality in relationships. I adore this concept of intentionality. That is at the heart of everything we're talking about here, about designing a relationship that works for us. Because most of us have inherited our ideas about relationships, this mononormativity stuff that comes from our family of origin. It comes from our like historical and social context, like where we are at a point in time in our society, in history, the people around us, the media we've consumed, movies. Like most of us have inherited ideas about relationships with very little kind of question. We're actually not really taught to question or design our own. So intentionality refers to actively choosing how you connect with your partner or partners, how you love, how you build relationships. And this isn't about being rigidity or overly planned. This is about relationships that are aligned with your values and meet your needs. And I'm going to talk about how to do this, how to design relationships. But before I do that, I want to again include another reflection question here. What do I want a relationship to bring into my life? What role does it play? And what kind of connection would feel most fulfilling for me? Take a moment to capture that. So, designing your relationship. I've got a number of design elements for you to consider here. So, you might want to take a moment as I go through here to pause if you're watching this back. To capture some of these design elements that I want you to have. Design elements is a word that I'm using really deliberately because this isn't, you're not hearing me here use words like rules, right? This is a co-creation. So this is you and the personal people that you're in the relationship with coming together to co-create a relationship that is based on your wants, your needs, and your values. It's about what actively works for the people involved, and it's not rigid. It's got fluidity to it. It's got room to move. We create that room to move in two key ways. The first is around communication. So always getting clarity on what you've just said that has been understood, but also that you've just understood what the other person has said. Other elements that fit here with communication are about a creative and curious approach to yourself and to each other. So that creativity and curiosity is kind of what I was getting at earlier when I asked you to notice in your body what was coming up as I was talking. If you notice resistance, meeting that with curiosity rather than resisting what you're hearing and moving away from what you're hearing. So if, for example, your partner comes to you and says they want to talk about changing the boundaries of your relationship around a particular topic, you might notice some resistance come in. And so your immediate response might be no. no, no, whatever you're raising, no, I'm saying no to that. But it's about being willing to go, oh, I'm noticing resistance, but I'm willing to sit with it and be curious. And I invite this on lots of different topics. We're not even just talking about something like sex or monogamy. This could be anything. Your partner wants to move to a particular suburb or buy a new couch or change your kids' schools or go to a different part of Bali for your holiday. It doesn't matter what it is. And if you immediately notice that your answer is no, imagine what you could say instead just to bring some curiosity. And I'm not talking about not honoring your no's. It might still be a no. In fact, every chance it will be. But it's about responding with some curiosity instead, because an immediate no leaves you going nowhere. It shuts down the conversation, shuts down the person that's come to you. So imagine what would happen if you said instead, oh, I'm noticing I want to say no. I'm noticing a lot of resistance, but I'm happy to stay with you and have a chat about this. And can I ask some questions? And can you tell me more about what you want? Even though I'm going to be sitting with some resistance, I'm here, I'm present, I'm open. So that kind of creative and curious response is really key to communication around this. The second piece that is critical to any intentional relationship is relationship check-ins. I am I am a huge fan of relationship check-ins. I am so repeatedly struck by the amount of communication, meetings, structure, planning, project plans that we will have about the most inane tasks at work. For example, you will go to work and have meetings and emails and operating rhythms and project plans about the most inane, boring tasks at home, at work. And then you will come home and you will bring none of that intentionality, planning, and structure to your romantic relationship. And that just blows my mind over and over again. I don't blame anyone for this, by the way. None of us were taught to do this. We were taught that relationships, a really strong internalized script that I see about relationships is that they're supposed to be like effortless. It's supposed to be easy. If it's hard, it's probably not right. I am of the view that relationships are most of the time supposed to be relatively easeful, but they will also always be effortful. And effort is a really important distinction to hard. So relationships will always be effortful. So it makes total sense to me that you would plan relationship check-ins. Now, a relationship check-in is a structured or semi-structured kind of forum meeting where you and your partner or partners will come together and check in on how the relationship is going. It might be a particular aspect of the relationship, maybe something you've been particularly working on, or it might be a general check-in. And I'm going to give you an example of this. I do also have a relationship check-in guide for sale on my website, and I want to remind you that as a member of my Unbound program on the Embrace Tour, you do get that discount code that you got in your initial welcome email. If you need that again, let me know, because my relationship check-in guide is a really detailed, kind of structured way of building a check-in that could work for you. But I want to give you an example from my own life. So last year, my current partner and I moved in together, and I was very anxious about this. I was living alone before that, and I adore living alone. I love living alone. And to make the decision to live with someone else, I had to really believe that that was going to be even better or really going to add to my life to be willing to give up living alone. So I was very anxious about this transition. And my partner knew that, and he didn't have quite the same anxieties. He'd also enjoyed living alone, but also quite happy to move in together and quite happy to give that up. And he knew it was a source of nervousness for me. So it was actually his idea. He sort of said, I think we should be doing, we were already doing relationship check-ins, but his idea was, I think we should dial them up while we adjust to living together. So for a while, we did weekly check-ins. We don't do them that often anymore, but we did weekly check-ins for many weeks when we first moved in together. And our structure was every Sunday night, we would get together and they would take about half an hour to an hour. And the topics we would cover were looking back on the past week, how have we felt about quality time together, including fun? How have we felt about our sexual connection? And how have we felt about the division of labor? So the domestic kind of load, mental load of living together. So that was what we would look back on. And then looking at the week, oh, and sorry, I missed one. And how did I support you this week? How did we support each other this week? Looking ahead, what have you got coming up this week that you need support on, or that you're stressed about, or that's on your mind? And it might be anything. It could be, got a really big meeting at work on Thursday and I've got a lot of prep to do and I'm really nervous about it. That kind of thing. How are we dividing up household tasks in the coming week? So like who's taking care of dinner when and that kind of thing. What are we doing in terms of quality time together, fun together, that kind of thing. And then just a general, like, what do you feel like you need from me in the coming week, if anything? So that was it. And sometimes that conversation will be really quick. It might be more like 15 minutes, and sometimes it might be an hour. The beauty of relationship check-ins is they provide a wonderful, safe container to raise any issues that you might otherwise just leave under the carpet. They also provide a really safe container to flexibly move the boundaries of the relationship. Now, what I mean by that is I don't necessarily mean big deal ones, like, hey, last week we were monogamous, this week we're not. I'm talking about, I've noticed we haven't really gone on a date night in the last couple of weeks. I really want to prioritize that this week. They allow you to make different aspects of the relationship a priority. They also allow you, as I said, to not have things swept under the carpet. So, for example, let's say that big important meeting on Thursday, my partner has the meeting on Thursday, and on Thursday night, I forget to ask them about it, and they come home and I just kind of bang on about other things. And my partner feels a bit hurt that I didn't ask about it, but he doesn't really say anything. He just listens to me talk about other things. And we go to bed, and the next day he kind of feels okay. So he never brings up, you forgot to ask me about this meeting and that hurt my feelings. But then on Sunday, when we get to our relationship check-in and we go, how was the week? How did you feel I supported you? He can go, well, actually, like, I didn't really say anything, but on Thursday you forgot about that meeting and that really hurt my feelings. So it's an opportunity to address things that we might otherwise let sweep under the rug that can build and grow and breed resentment. So some key design elements I want to give you to help you design your own relationship with intentionality. And take a moment to capture these if you want to. What kind of commitment feels good? Right? Everything. What kind of commitment feels good? What kind of connection do we want across different domains, like platonic, sensual, romantic, sexual? What kinds of connections do we want with each other and with others? How do we handle boundaries with regards to things like time, privacy, sex, money, emotional closeness, future plans? These are really important. How do we handle boundaries and communication and working together around all of those different areas? Where do we want exclusivity? So, further to that boundaries conversation, is our exclusivity sexual, emotional, logistical? So, do we want exclusivity sexually? Sexual monogamy. Uh, what do I consider exclusivity versus infidelity? So, what are our kind of boundaries and exclusivities around things like emotional closeness, flirting, sex, kissing, and also what's our exclusivity and boundaries around logistics? Living together, children, travel. How do we feel about traveling together or separately? So you can design in and design out any areas that you want in your relationship. And if you have structure, like a relationship check-in, you can constantly be checking, is this still working for you? So my partner and I no longer have weekly relationship check-ins. We'll dial them up sometimes if we feel like we need them, but we don't have them weekly anymore. But we have bigger relationship check-ins every couple of months, and they include checking how are we still feeling about our degree of monogamy. We don't have a strictly monogamous relationship, but I would say if monogamy was here and non-monogamy was here, we're further down that end. But we are constantly asking ourselves and each other, how are we feeling about that? Are we getting what we want? Are we comfortable? Is it still working? We are constantly checking and normalizing the checking, normalizing asking each other, is this what I want? Now, one of the big areas people think of when they think about intentionality and think about designing their relationship is, of course, non-monogamy. Now, I've had some questions about non-monogamy, so I want to spend some time here now talking about this particular part of relationship structure. So, non-monogamy is an umbrella term, and underneath that are many different types of relationship styles and non-monogamy. So, I want to give you an example of some of the most common terms that you might have heard of. You might have heard of polyamory. So polyamory is an openness to having multiple romantic, emotional, and sexual connections with people. Doesn't mean you necessarily are at any one time. You can be polyamorous and have one partner, you can be polyamorous and have 10 partners. But the important point here is the openness and everyone's knowledge and consent that there's openness to these multiple connections. Most people who are polyamorous would say that they believe it's possible to hold romantic love for multiple people at the same time. I myself have been polyamorous in polyamorous relationships previously. I'm not currently in a relationship that I would consider polyamorous, but I have been previously, and I firmly believe you can hold romantic love for multiple people at the same time. That is a possibility, but that doesn't mean it's possible for every single person on the planet. I just know that it's a possibility that exists in the world. You might have also heard the term swinging, which is typically couples sexually exploring with others, maybe playing together. So maybe couples playing with other couples together. You might have heard the term open relationship. So an open relationship is usually where there is a primary partnership and they have agreements around sex being non-exclusive. You might have also heard the term solo polyamory, which is where people are polyamorous, but they don't prioritize like a primary partnership. So people can be polyamorous and be, married and have that primary partnership, or people can be solo poly, where they might be having multiple relationships, but they don't have like a primary one. And some people who are solo polyamorous would say that their primary relationship is with themselves. And then there's this term relationship anarchy, which is a rejection of all things relationship hierarchy. So one of the things that exists within many aspects of non-monogamy is that there is a primary, what we call like a primary partnership. So you might have a couple that are primary, that have been together for many years, and maybe they're non-monogamous in some way. They might be polyamorous or open, and they might have other connections, other relationships, but this is considered the primary, right? And within the non-monogamy community, lots of people have concerns with that term. They feel that it's, it privileges that couples, there's a term called couples privilege. And that's really important to be aware of. And a lot of people have concerns with this idea of like a primary relationship means a disrespect or poorer outcomes for people who are in, I guess, secondary relationships with these people. So this term relationship anarchy rejects those kinds of hierarchies. It really focuses on everyone's autonomy, everyone being entitled to equal respect and consideration. So they're just a few of the terms. There's loads more I could go into, but I don't want to kind of overcomplicate it. They're just some of the main ones that you may have heard of. Non-monogamy is, I think being traditionally associated with sex and also with a lower level of commitment. They are some of the myths I hear about non-monogamy that simply aren't true. One of the other myths I hear is that it means you're not jealous. And of course, that is the first reaction I hear, as I said before, when people who have previously been in monogamous relationships hear about non-monogamy. There's this immediate like, oh, I'd be so jealous. I could never do that. I could never have my partner be with other people, that kind of thing. Being non-monogamous, practicing non-monogamy does not mean the absence of jealousy. I think that would be highly unrealistic. You will still have boundaries if you're in a non-monogamous relationship, and it does not mean you're doing it wrong if you experience jealousy, insecurity, or doubt. It is a massive leap to imagine being in a non-monogamy and a non-monogamous relationship if all you've ever known is monogamy. That is a massive leap. We are seeing, I just want to pause there and say, by the way, I'm going to share an example about moving from monogamy to non-monogamy in a minute. Before I do that, I want to reflect that where non-monogamy is happening across the lifespan, there is probably a pretty common myth or misconception out there that non-monogamy is for younger people, but actually it could not be further from the truth. In fact, the research tells us that exploring different ways of non-monogamy is most common and popular for people in their 30s and 40s. Many recent studies and surveys have shown that people younger in their 20s actually prefer monogamy. One of the theories for this is that younger adults are still perhaps struggling with their own insecurities and acceptance of themselves, and find more comfort in what they perceive to be a more secure structure of monogamy, which is, of course, not true. Monogamy is no more secure than non-monogamy. But the perception of it being more secure leads sort of 20-somethings to tend towards a more monogamous structure. But we're actually seeing people in their 30s, 40s, and into 50s far more likely to explore non-monogamy. And then it tends to decline again once people are in their 60s. And there tends to be a reverting back to monogamy, but not for everyone. It really ramps up for people in their sort of midlife, this 30s, 40s, 50s, for a number of different reasons. We've got increased self-acceptance, increased awareness of one's own wants and needs, particularly sexually. Definitely more, certainly not perfect, but more body acceptance. We've also got some like real solidification of personal values. So a real awareness of like, I know what's important to me. You've also got some really interesting things happening at these life stages, right? You've maybe got parenting responsibilities shifting, maybe. You've certainly got your own sexual desires and preferences shifting. You've also got things happening at that life stage. So a couple of really notable things happening at that life stage are potentially divorce or leaving a long-term relationship, a relationship that has perhaps been a primary relationship for much of your adult life. You've maybe also got children turning into adults moving out of home. You've maybe got aging parents dying. You've also maybe got some hormonal stuff happening, definitely like perimenopause, menopause, that kind of thing. So you've got a few different things happening at this stage. If you are interested in exploring non-monogamy, I want to give you a couple of tips on where to do that. And I also want to talk about one of the questions I actually got in anticipation of this webinar was how to open a previously monogamous relationship. So I want to give you some practical things to take away here. So firstly, exploring non-monogamy. If that is something you are interested in exploring, I want to invite you to check out a couple of things. The first area you could explore is definitely through your own self-reflection, keeping up the journaling, but perhaps also seeing a therapist who's really specialized in this space of non-monogamy. I unfortunately have heard many stories of people being actively rejected by their therapist because they practice non-monogamy, which makes me very angry. If you need help finding a suitable therapist, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I can refer you to some wonderful colleagues. But having the opportunity to explore this with someone you trust is really important. If you don't know anyone in the non-monogamy community too, that can feel very isolating. And that was my experience when I first started exploring non-monogamy. I didn't really know anyone that was doing it. So that can be very isolating. So connection to community is really important. Connection to a supportive therapist is possible, but connection to community, I really invite you to check out. There are some wonderful apps, parties, scenes in your local area. Again, let me know if you want help connecting to any of these. A wonderful app is Feeld, which is spelled F-E-E-L-D. Feeld is a dating app that is particularly skewed towards people exploring non-monogamy and kink. That doesn't mean you have to be doing either of those things, by the way, but it is just specifically cued to that. People put out there on Feeld exactly what they're after with regards to sex and relationships. You can still go on Feeld and want to explore monogamy and want to explore perfectly vanilla sex. That is still very welcome there. But people really put it out there on Feeld, and it's a wonderful way to connect to community. You will find more and more people willing to explore this kind of relationship structure with you. non-monogamy is really having a moment. Even though it's a really, really old relationship structure, it's actually far older than monogamy when it comes to human evolution. But right now, in our present day and age, after we've been through in our human history, we've been through a long period of centering religion and monogamy and heterosexuality. We are now seeing some opening up of these kinds of boundaries and rules, and non-monogamy is definitely having a moment. And there's been some recent studies that I've read that have shown approximately 10% of people are interested and would be open to having an open relationship or a non-monogamous relationship of some kind. 1 in 10. But actually, at the moment, it's only about 1 in 4 people that are actually doing it. So I know there is a gap here. I know more people want to explore this. Now, like I said, one of the questions I got in the lead up to this webinar was opening up. How do you open up a previously monogamous relationship? And I have experience in this. So I was in a relationship that went for about nearly 10 years, and it was mostly monogamous. And towards the end of that relationship, we did actually open it up. And we opened it up in a pretty open way. We went straight to kind of being quite polyamorous. So actively exploring dating and having relationships with other people separately. So that was how we did it. It was initiated by me, and I had the opportunity to make a new friend who was polyamorous, and she was telling me about some of her relationships. And up until then, I'd never heard anyone talk like this. I had only been in monogamous relationships, two very long ones, my marriage from when I was young that I mentioned earlier, and this person who I'd been with for nearly 10 years. So at this time in my life, this was only a few years ago, I was in sort of my late 30s. And I made this new friend who talked to me about polyamory, about her relationships, and something just clicked for me. I was like, this makes sense to me. And I'd always felt like there was some things missing for me in monogamy that I just didn't quite understand. I'd always found that it didn't feel particularly secure. It didn't feel particularly honest. It felt a bit constraining, but I didn't understand why because I didn't know what else was out there. And my mononormativity was so internalized. I had fully accepted this was what I was supposed to be doing. I was definitely riding some relationship escalators, never questioning it. And when this friend told me about this way of structuring relationships, it was like a genie out of the bottle that I could not put back. And within a couple of days of that conversation, went home and talked to my partner at the time and said, I think I want to try this. What do you think? And he met me with such compassion and uh, and such grace and such openness. And and so we gave it a go. And we made a heap of mistakes. We got a lot of things wrong. My biggest mistake was under communicating. I was so concerned with hurting his feelings that I under communicated. Didn't hide things necessarily, but I under communicated. I left things out. I delayed telling him things. I played things down. I definitely made some mistakes there. Um, but we learned a lot and we did some things really well. We moved at two very different paces. Even though I was the one that brought it up, he was the one kind of out the gate, straight on dating apps, seeing what was out there, seeing what was happening, starting to talk to people. I was slower. Um, and the first date I went on turned out to be a very important long-term connection for me. So even though I moved slower, my relationships progressed to something more serious, more quickly, and that was really hard for my partner at the time. And so there was lots that we had to explore, and it could be a whole separate, discussion I have with you all. But I wanted to share it because, as I said, one of the questions I got was, how do you open up a previously monogamous relationship? Like, how do you raise it? So given that I've been through it and made a ton of mistakes, I have a number of really solid tips for you. The first is take your time. And that doesn't necessarily mean pump the brakes. Like, as I said, the first date I went on turned out to be a very important connection to me. But still, just take your time. Just take your time. Don't, maybe you want to go on one dating app rather than 10. Like, take your time. Take your time, though, with the communication and the decision making with your partner. This is not a one conversation. So, this is not, when I raised it with my partner, I said to him in that first conversation, I don't want a decision from you right now. I don't want an answer. I want you to think about this. I know I'm coming to this conversation having thought about this nonstop for days and probably years subconsciously before that. But this is the first you're hearing of it. So take your time. Take your time. Like, let's have questions. Let's keep talking. We do not have to kind of rush to decisions all the time. So my advice to anyone who wants to open their relationship is to have lots of conversations, lots of curiosity, resisting the urge to get to an answer or a decision. Just explore the idea. I love using external resources to explore ideas. So follow people on social media who are practicing non-monogamy and sharing their examples. Check out podcasts, watch TV shows about it. Watch TV shows, watch movies where this is happening, and say to your partner, what do you think about that? Like, have you ever thought about that? I'm kind of curious about that. What do you think? Take your time, explore together, use external resources, practice curiosity. These things open up the conversation rather than shut it down. If you say to your partner, I've been thinking about I've just been thinking about how I feel about monogamy. And I've been thinking about structures of monogamy, internalized mononormativity, and I've just been kind of questioning within myself what I actually want. Can we talk about it? Imagine if you were met with a like, no, no, we can't talk about it. No, I would never do anything. No, we're monogamous. That's it. It's such a shutdown. What I would love for you to receive instead from your partner is something like, oh, this is making me super uncomfortable. I'm very anxious, but of course we can talk about it. We can talk about anything. I can't control what your partner says, obviously, but you can influence. You have a shot at influencing how this conversation goes by bringing your own openness, curiosity, acknowledgement of discomfort. That's how you maximize the chance of these conversations being open and productive. Now, I could talk a lot more about this topic, opening up a previously monogamous relationship. And if there is interest from this group about a whole separate webinar dedicated to that, I'm really happy to do that. So let me know if you want me to deep dive on this topic, if opening up a previously monogamous relationship is interesting to you to hear more about. But we've covered today relationship structures, bringing intentionality, challenging internalized mononormativity. We've touched on relationship check-ins and communication and the importance of curiosity, and we've also done a bit of a dive there into non-monogamy. So we've covered a lot. I expect there's some discomfort for you, resistance, and I really invite you to lean into that. Even if you change nothing about your relationships right now, lean into your own feelings with curiosity. Stay with some of these questions we've talked about today. Think about what kind of assumptions about relationships that I've been making do I want to examine more deeply? What kind of relationships might feel freeing, meaningful, and nourishing to me? And what support might I need? Whether that's professional, social, community, what support might I need? Now, if you want external resources, let me know. I don't want to bombard you here, but I definitely have a number of really great, podcasts, content creators, shows, lots of resources here I can recommend. So reach out to me if you want me to send anything your way. But otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording in a moment. Again, I really love when I hear from you, and I do hear from some of you via Instagram messages and emails, and I love it. I love it every single time. So please reach out if you have any thoughts, feedback, questions, topics you want me to cover. It means the world to me if this is landing for you and helping you and getting you thinking about things. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy your day.